Some of you love your work and can't wait for the day to begin. You want to attack the day. You have what I call a calling in your chosen profession. On the other hand, if you can't wait for the day or the week to end, you might have more of a job or trading time for a paycheck. In my 30 years of experience, I've seen a variety of attitudes and approaches to work and life. There are doctors that love what they do and others that hate it. There are administrative assistants who hate what they do and others that love it. According to the latest Gallup research, only 21% of workers worldwide are engaged. That means that 79% are disengaged. And according to other research, 70% worldwide are experiencing some form of burnout. And in some professions like healthcare, it's about 80% burnout. The ownership factor is about deciding whether you want to have a job, a career, or a calling in the work that you do. Today, I want you to become aware of the power that you have to choose in your life to have a job, a career, or a calling. I know if you're like me, you've worked with people that have been absolutely amazing because of just how much they care about the work, the team, and everyone else, because they take greater ownership. They never complain. They're all in. On the other hand, you've worked with people that have probably driven you crazy. They never take responsibility. They're constantly blaming. Nothing is ever their fault. They are gossiping. They're blaming. They're the kind of people that when you see them coming, you want to turn the other way. Or when they call you on the phone, you want to swipe left because you just don't have time to deal with that right now. Today, it is my hope that after all this great information that you are receiving from eCore and partners, and you go back to your families, to your work environment, that you are the ones that lift and elevate others by your example, by your actions, by the level of ownership that you take. I invite you to lift and elevate others by your example and ownership. So, the ownership factor is what I'm going to be talking to you about today, owning your outcomes. And I'm going to share 5 ways for you to take greater ownership in your life. And this is a topic, a concept, the ownership factor, that allows you to be fulfilled in your work and your life, regardless of external circumstances and despite any other people's actions and behaviors. I want to say that again. The ownership factor means that you have the opportunity to be fulfilled in your work and life, regardless of external circumstances and despite anybody else's actions. You have the power to choose how you will think and act. This is what the ownership is all about. And it's very closely related to responsibility. And it's about being able to look in the mirror and realize that the quality of your relationships, the results you're experiencing in your career, really just the outcomes that you're having and the quality of how you feel about the work and the burnout all comes from the thoughts and actions of the person looking back at you in the mirror. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Now, it is simple in theory, but much more difficult in practice. So that's why I'm here to help you to understand. Now, there are 3 types of responsibility. There's what we call non-responsibility. That's where we're deflecting and blaming others, not taking responsibility. There's irresponsibility, which is really about being careless and reckless, and these people are a menace to society. Of course, we have responsibility, and that's where we want to be. That's more closely aligned to the ownership factor, but it doesn't quite get there yet. So responsibility is good, and it gives you the power to excel in your profession, but it's the ownership factor that goes above and beyond responsibility to where you really have that calling in life. And that is my hope, that when you go back to your work, that you will feel a greater calling in what you do and the work you do in technology. And it's one of the reasons why eCore exists, to help support you in all of the work that you do and having that passion for making such a difference in your organization. But I want to do a little survey with you to see if you are responsible, if you're taking ownership, or maybe non-responsible, hopefully not irresponsible. So I'm going to read to you a couple of comments and see if you've ever said or thought any of these things. So have you ever, and listen to this, I'm just wired to be unhappy. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I don't care what others think. I need permission. Some people are just born cynical and will never change. I'm not good at math. I'm just not a funny person. I'm scared to take a risk. She's a born athlete. If only my partner were more understanding, more helpful, less judgmental, etc., etc. We did that once and it didn't work. I just don't have enough time. That's just the way I am. Get over it. I'm not good at sales. Boy, there's so many here. It seems if I have to do it myself if I want it done well. If I only had a better boss, spouse, or children. I don't get paid enough to do that. Why can't people be more realistic like me? I only come to these workshops because I have to, or I get some type of credit from my company for doing so. Required continuing education is some motivation, but hopefully you're here because you want to learn. There's no point in speaking up, some people say. Nobody ever asks for my opinion or follows up on my ideas. We never know what's going on. I have to be honest, all this touchy-feely crap just makes me cranky. So if you've ever said or thought any of these things, perhaps it's time to take a little more ownership, but it's understandable. Think about what you do in the technology field. I mean, you're working on digital transformations, which is really a huge change for many organizations. You're working on modernization of your applications, moving to the cloud, and business evolution that you're working on, and software development. That is a complex project that you have to manage, and upgrading your current software, value stream management and agile transformation and cybersecurity. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is all part of what you do. Think about the skills that are required to do that. You certainly have to understand systems and processes and code, but then you have to talk to people who are non-language speakers in technology, like me, like many of the owners of your organizations. And that takes communication, that takes leadership, it takes conflict management, it takes, in addition to all of your project management skills, you've got to manage scope and time and budget and resources. And gosh, what did I miss? This is why from time to time we get overwhelmed, and work can become a challenge. It's almost like you have to be a superhero, because effectively balancing all of these requirements, the task and the human skills, it requires flexibility in your approach. And some people are naturally good at the systems and process. Some of you may be better at the people skills. But this is where some of the challenge comes in. When things get difficult, and they will, deadlines, budgets, changes, and the marketplace changes, and like we've seen in the last 2 years, that things that are unexpected that we haven't thought of make things very difficult, and it can become overwhelming. When things are overwhelming, what happens is that the brain starts to create patterned responses. It does that anyway under normal circumstances so that it conserves energy, but under pressure, it relies more on those patterned responses. And some of those pattern responses are good, but others can hold us back. You see, what happens is the brain begins to delete, to distort, and to simplify. Why? To keep you safe, to keep you in a comfort zone. And that can prevent you from changing and adapting the way that you need to. Now, I want to show you how simply the brain starts to delete, distort, and simplify. And what I'd like you to do, wherever you are, if you're at home or at the office and watching this, I want you to spell out loud. Go ahead and follow along with me. Speak out loud to the screen, to me. Spell the word roast. R-O-A-S-T. Spell it again. Spell roast. R-O-A-S-T. Spell roast. R-O-A-S-T. Do it again. Roast. R-O-A-S-T. Now I have a question for you. What do you put into a toaster? Probably some of you said toast, when really you put bread into a toaster, don't you? Now, why did I do that? It was a simple trick. You knew it was coming, but maybe you fell for it anyway. In 30 seconds, I created a neural pathway that was completely useless for you. By just having you say that word roast, the brain began to delete, distort, and simplify. So when I said something else, you were following in that same pattern. This happens in our work, in our life. Taking ownership is difficult for one of the first reasons I just told you, because of how our brains work. The second reason why taking ownership is difficult is because we live in a culture where placing blame, non-responsibility, is deeply rooted in our culture. And science has proven that our attitudes are literally catching like a virus, like more catching than the coronavirus and the new Omicron or whatever the next variant is. Our attitudes are so contagious, whether for good or for bad. So if somebody else's children are having a bad day, they give your children a negativity cold and they come home and they share that with you. It's happening every single day. Maybe you've been in an office with a coworker or a boss that came in a bad attitude, and that impacted you and your day, and you unfortunately maybe took that home to your loved ones. You probably have experienced that emotional contagion. There's another example of emotional contagion. If you've ever been next to someone who pulled out maybe a milk that was sour and they tasted it and they made that disgust face, you didn't even have to taste the milk and you experienced that same disgust feeling. Well, I want to share with you and show you an example of how contagious our emotions are. I'm going to show you a commercial. This is a little video that I will play here. So hopefully the sound will work. Here we go. Okay, a little commercial, as I said. So now what I want you to do is I want you to try an experiment. I want you to find someone, get with somebody that maybe is in the room with you, or if they're not, if there's no one with you, get with someone else later. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell them that no matter what you do or say, they are to remain stoic. In other words, they are to not smile, they're not to do anything. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to look deeply into their eyes and just smile. For 7 seconds. I want you to do that for 7 seconds. See what happens. Even after you told them to be stoic, all you do is look deeply into their eyes and smile. I'm sure, unless they have a problem with how just attitude or whatever, they're going to smile. 80% of the time, someone else is going to smile. Your smile, your attitude is infectious. When I do this with large audiences, the room just erupts in laughter in seconds because people can't not smile. So now that you hopefully you're smiling and maybe someone else is smiling, let's talk about what happens when things don't go well, when there are challenges. Psychologist Martin Seligman says, and he did years of research on, and he found that animals and humans respond the same way when life gives us a setback or puts pressure on us in ways that we didn't anticipate. And what he found is that many of us can give up and lose hope and just have what he calls learned helplessness. So what I want to talk to you about now is how that happens. During the last recession, I remember I was speaking, this was 2009 timeframe, right? I was speaking to a friend who was just about getting ready to lose his house. The value of the homes had dropped tremendously. And so he stopped paying that because he was like, there were, all these programs available for people to maybe make up that value of their home. Sometimes the government gets involved and tries to create incentives for people. But he was blaming the government. He was blaming the banks for the fact he was losing his house. And I stopped him. I said, wait a minute. Was it the bank or the president at the time that caused you to stop paying your mortgage? You did that so that you could take advantage of these programs. And now that they're not coming through, it's their fault. And you're not taking ownership. And what I was sharing with him is that his focus on who to blame was preventing him from getting creative to solve a problem that was pretty severe. When there are no consequences for our poor decisions, there's no incentive for us to change. And my friend deflecting of blame was causing him to not change his behavior or do something different or get creative to solve that problem. And this is a perfect example of non-responsibility, almost irresponsibility, even though he was the owner. When we buy a home, we take a risk that the value of the home might go up or go down. If it goes up, we benefit. If it goes down, well, that's a risk that we have to take. This happens in businesses too. A lot of leaders choose not to take ownership because they don't want to look bad to those that they lead. They want to make popular decisions and they reject the ownership factor. Now, let's talk about hardship for a second, because I'm sure many of you have experienced hardship. It can be a powerful catalyst for change. I started working for a leadership development company in 2008 to just, to be a trainer, just as the recession started. And that's what people cut first, unfortunately. And the sales of the company cut in half almost overnight. And so the company asked me to start selling. And so January 1st of 2009, I was selling on 100% commission. And it was a tough time to find another job. This was a difficult situation. So I had to learn how to get creative. I had to feed my family. So I figured out a different way to sell that would work in this new environment that was different than what this company had done traditionally in the past. I became the vice president of sales, and I eventually became the CEO of that company. Well, I made a goal to do that in 5 years. I did it in 5 years and 1 month. That's not to impress you. I was the fourth CEO in 5 years. There were challenges with this company, and they were willing to change. I wanted to enact greater change to help move that company forward. But the owner of the company chose not to take my advice. And after 7.5 years with this company, I was found without a job. I had just been recovering from the last recession and starting to get my bank account back to scratch. And now I had to start over. I was so excited though, because now I was free. I could use everything that I'd learned, and I started my own business in 2015. It's been 7 years and it's been hard, but all the lessons I learned during those hard times during the last recession have helped me during the pandemic, during 2020 and up till now. You see, think about people in your life that you know that have experienced some type of sickness. Maybe it was cancer, maybe it was, I don't know, leukemia or something, you know, diabetes, or they lost a limb or had a stroke or a heart attack, something awful and terrible. And if they lived, I know so many people that have changed their lifestyle and come out even stronger than before, eating more healthy, taking care of themselves. This is what can happen when we take greater ownership for the results that we experience in your life. An economic crisis like we may be focusing or having can cause us to focus on being more creative. If you think back to the Great Depression, companies like Texas Instruments and Hewlett-Packard came out of the Great Depression because it is that hardship that causes us to take greater ownership and creativity and change our approach. On the other hand, if we choose to blame, we can sink into despair and learn helplessness, as Dr. Martin Seligman said, and we can give up in many areas of our life. If you do an internet search for who is to blame, just type in who's to blame, all kinds of stuff will come up. I'm going to show you what I have found. I just did some recent research, but here's one that's a little older. This goes back to 2012. This research surveyed over 1,000 people about who were middle class, and they said it was harder to maintain their standard of living. And the research says, who do you blame for this? And here's what they found. 62% blame Congress, 54 of the banks, 47 corporations. At the time in America, George Bush was president, 44, he was out of office for 4 years by this time, right? Because they still blamed him. Foreign corporations, President Obama, 34%, only 8% took personal ownership for the situations that they're in. Here's another research in 2016 for the opioid crisis that the Harvard stat poll showed only 1/3 took personal responsibility. It's the doctors, it's the drug companies, and nobody's taking personal responsibility. Here are just quickly some articles that I'm showing that what I did is, you know, who's to blame. If you look through all of these articles, one after the other, nobody's taking personal responsibility. This is the culture that we're living in right now. One of the things that I like to do when I'm meeting with people live is to show you even how your best people on your team can resort to blame. I like to get people together and do a little process. And I'll usually invite about 14 people up on the stage like this. And I get them to put their palms down and make a little fist with their pointer finger out. And then what I'll do is I'll put a little tent pole on their fingers like that. And I give them a task. I say, your task is to keep your finger in touch with that pole at all times and to work together as a team of 14 people and put that stick on the ground with keeping your fingers in touch with it. And I picked these people out of the audience as the best of the best. And what happens is inevitably the stick goes up 100% of the time. And people start looking at why is it going up in one end and who is causing it to go up, and they start blaming almost instantly. And the audience is laughing, and they're like, you know, it's hard. And then we talk about why did that happen? And what's happening, and there's a reason why it's going up, and there's some physics involved, but it takes very concerted focus and effort to work together to bring it down. It can be done, and it can be done with effort. The same is true of the work that you have to do, all the transformation that you're working on, all the challenges that you have to face. It can be easy to blame others when things don't go right. But when you start focusing on the outcomes that you want, you can have that success. And they ultimately had the success, but it was just a lot harder than they thought. And this is a process that is just so powerful and shows what happens when things don't go the way we want. We start to turn our attention elsewhere instead of taking ownership. So knowing that our brains work against us, society is working against us, how can we take greater ownership? What are the things that we can do? I promised you I'd share with you 5 steps. And here they are. The first step is we want to take greater ownership by owning our values. Wake up to how impactful when you have purpose and values, you harness your brain's power to take more control in your life. You become reactive. No, not reactive, proactive instead of reactive. One of the ways that you bring values into your life is a job craft to really take your job and make it more of a calling by owning it as an owner and inserting your values into what you do. And I'm gonna show you how to identify your values here in just a moment. But this is a very, very powerful process to take greater ownership. Number 2, own your outcomes. Choose responsibility no matter what. This is about really the law of the harvest, right? This is you reap what you sow. Number 3, own your failures. Don't let them own you. And recognize there is no failure, only feedback. And you're not going to grow if you don't risk. So failure is a part of life. And you just get to take a little bit of a mind shift in order to learn from those opportunities. Number 4, own your development. Learn from those who can teach you, mentor, and coach you. You've got great partners like eCore that can help you learn to celebrate success, spotlight behavior that you want to create more of. And lastly, I want you to own your thoughts. Our thoughts are so, so powerful, and they impact our results and our satisfaction. And again, this is about job crafting and having the mindset of, do you have a job, a career, or a calling? All right, so let's dig into each of these in greater detail. And we're going to start with owning your values. So the first step in taking 100% ownership is to get clear about what's important to you. What do you value? Our values represent our guiding principles, our broadest motivations, and they influence our attitudes that we hold and how we act. And so when you have purpose or goals that are tied to a higher cause, that creates a sense of significance. So our values actually influence our beliefs, which influence our expectations of how the world should be treating us, or people that work with us should be treating us. That impacts our attitudes about what we should be experiencing and getting, which impacts our behavior, which ultimately gives us our results. I want you to think of the parable of the bricklayer. In London in 1666, there was a great fire, and it burned almost the entire city. Well, it was being rebuilt, and one of the people that was charged with rebuilding many of the cathedrals, I think he was building 6 of the cathedrals. One of them was St. Paul's, was Christopher Wren, sorry. Christopher Wren was the architect. And the process took many years. He started in 1667 on St. Paul's Cathedral, and it went all the way until 1710. But during the process, Christopher Wren went to watch the rebuilding of the cathedral, and he saw 3 bricklayers, and they looked very different. The first one was just hunched over and just working kind of rotely, and then the second one was still a little hunched, but a little more upright. And then a third one had his head high, was excited, was going, and he wanted to understand what was going on with these 3 bricklayers. So he went to the first bricklayer and he says, "Hi, what are you doing?" He says, "This is the one that was hunched over." He says, "Well, I'm working. I'm laying bricks so that I can feed my family." And he asked the second bricklayer, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm a builder. I'm building a wall." And the third one that was standing up and seemed more excited and more proud, he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I am a builder, and I am building a house to the Almighty." You see, the first bricklayer had a job. He was just working for that paycheck. The second one had a career. That was his living, building walls. But the third bricklayer had a vision of what he was doing. He was building a house to the Almighty. You see, this is about job crafting. It's about maximizing your ownership for what you do, and about greater engagement and executing strategic priorities. And you know exactly where it is you're going and what you want. You're taking ownership of your motivations and your drivers, and that influences your attitudes and how you act. So you have to align your behavior to your values. And sometimes we're not in alignment with those values. I used to think that identifying values was just a good idea. Now I know that it is absolutely essential. I had my son-in-law years ago, he runs a company today, but he worked for Bain Consulting. And in 2019, he had become physically ill because for years he'd been working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And that's not why he was sick. He was sick because his values were to spend more time with his family, and that was suffering. And he felt this just tear at him that was causing him to be miserable. So he changed. And today he owns a company, works just as hard, but he's learned how to find time for what he values the most, his family. Now, there are several types of values. There's aspirational values. In other words, things that we want to achieve that we haven't figured out yet. There are just suppressed values. There are invisible values. But what I want you to identify is core values. These are things that exist within us. So I want you to think right now. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I want you to think of what you hate, what just drives you crazy. And the reason I want you to think of that is because I want you to think of what's the opposite of that. So for example, one of the things that I hate is graffiti. It just drives me crazy. Why do I hate it? Because I think it's disrespectful. I think it's, not caring for someone else's property. I think it's ignorant. So what is the opposite of all of those things? Caring for others. Being educated, understanding what we do, how it impacts others. So what do I value? I value all those things that are opposite of that. So that's one of the ways you can identify your values. Number two, I want you to think of a situation in your life that you are extremely proud of. Maybe you ran a race, or you finished your degree, or you finished a project on time, under budget, whatever it was. And think about what it was about those things that you're most proud of. Within that is embedded your values. Now, how does this give you power to take more ownership? Let me explain. If you're like me, maybe you identified one of your values to be your family, just like me. Now, I've been married for 36 years to the love of my life. We have 5 children, and we have now 6 grandchildren. And so it's not, so this June, my oldest son just got married, and this is our family growing. And it's not just the family that I value, it's the time we spend together. It's the activities that we have. It's creating opportunities for learning and having fun and strengthening those relationships. Well, how does that give me value? Because if I value that and I don't make time for them, then I'm going to feel burnout. I'm going to feel frustration. I'm going to feel like I don't have control. But if I take ownership, then I make time for things that are most important to me. If you say that your health is important to you, how much time do you actually spend exercising? If you say your significant other is important to you, how much time do you actually spend on dates? If you say that your faith is important, how much time do you spend serving or reading your sacred texts? Here is an example of my calendar, and you see that I book every morning. Almost every morning I am exercising, mountain biking, running, even though it may not look like it. That is absolutely a necessity for me. I'm traveling. I have coaching sessions. I have scheduled time for church and for study and personal time. I have a routine that I follow because I prioritize the things that are most important to me. If I don't live according to my values, what happens? My calendar fills up with trivial and unimportant things, and I feel overwhelmed and frustrated. On the other hand, if I set up my time and my calendar and my schedule for the things that are most important, I can look back just like you can on my weeks and my days and my years, and I've made time for the things that are most important to me. That's ownership. That's where I want you to be, is to feel engaged and excited about life. All right, number 2, we need to move this along. Owning your outcomes. This is about personal accountability, taking responsibility no matter what, even when things that are not your fault go wrong. When you take ownership, even for things that aren't your fault, it's amazing. More opportunities will come your way. Well, I want to explain this principle to you of the own your outcomes by sharing with you what's called the 90-10 principle. The 90-10 principle is about 10% of life is what happens to you, and 90% how you respond to the 10%. So imagine you're having breakfast and your son or daughter, your son or daughter spills the orange juice or coffee on you, and you jump up and you say, how can you be so clumsy? I can't believe you did that. What's going to happen to your daughters? You know, they're going to start crying and their mascara is going to run, you know, even in middle school or 6th grade. And so they go running upstairs, and now you've got to change your pants. So you go upstairs and change your pants, and you come back down, and your significant other is upset at you. Listen, you caused this. Now she's missed the bus. You got to take her to school. And so, you know, your day's not off to a great start. So you take your daughter to school, and you're doing 45 and a 25, and you get pulled over. Well, day just gets a little bit worse. You take your daughter, she gets to the school, she opens the door and doesn't say goodbye, she slams the door, and you get to the office and you realize you forgot your laptop, your computer. And by the time you get home, you just want this day to be over. You find out that there's a wedge between you and your significant other. Now, my question is, why did you have a bad day? Was it, let's do a little questionnaire. Was it the orange juice's fault? Was it the policeman's fault? Was it your fault? Let's rewind the day. Just imagine, again, your daughter or your son, they spilled the orange juice or the coffee, and you jump back and you're like, oh, little accident. And your daughter says, oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. And you're like, it's okay, sweetie. I can change. Don't worry about it. Just try to be a little more careful next time. You go upstairs, you change your clothes, and you come downstairs in time to say goodbye to your daughter who's just getting on the bus. Now, what's different about this day? It's how you chose to react to what you couldn't control. Now, some of you are saying, well, Spencer, that's such a simple example. You're right. Life is more complicated than that. This is my mom. I just want to share a lesson I learned about personal ownership from her. She was a beautiful woman. This left is just graduated from high school, and the right, you know, young, beautiful woman. Well, at the age 30s, in her 30s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She lived, and 10 years later, it came back when I was 18 years old. And she gathered my siblings and I around her, and she said, you know, the doctors have given me 6 months to live. She says, you know what, we're going to live our lives. I'm going to continue to teach, and Spencer, you're going to go serve a mission. I was called to serve, you know, live in Rome, Italy when I was 19. So that was just a few months later. And she's like, we're going to live our lives. We're not going to feel sorry. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself, and I don't want you to feel sorry for me. She did not choose the cancer. She was an English teacher. Her students loved her. She couldn't even hardly sit up all day in her chair. She had to put on herself on a stool and not move. She was in such pain. Kids would come over to the house to visit her because they loved Mrs. Horn so much. And she was one of their favorite teachers. Well, she didn't choose the cancer, but she chose how she responded. I want you to think about where you can take, this is her towards the end of her life before my mission. She's wearing a wig there. Isn't she beautiful? That's not her real hair. You know, when we own our outcomes, it gives us great power. I want you to train your brains to see the good in the relationships that we have between our thoughts, our actions, and our outcomes. And when we do that, not only are we happier, but we set an event. Basically, we set a chain of events that creates more of what we want. So I want you to think about where you can take greater ownership in your life, at work, in your personal life. I want to share this model just in a little more detail. And I want you to think about when SH happens. What is SH? Something happens in our life. When we blame, we're reacting automatically. So our response overlaps to something happen. And what happens is that the little arrow represents our energy, our power. When we allow our patterned responses to control us, we feel trapped in the past and the future. We're bored, we're angry, we're hurt. We feel burned out. We're waiting for others to act. We shut down, we feel resentment. We're a victim and we blame. We feel our responses automatically happening to the stimulus around us. So I want you to think about where in your life are you blaming, and be self-assessed, be honest with yourself. This is only for you. Where you are blaming in your life. Now, there's an individual by the name of Viktor Frankl, and he was an Austrian psychiatrist who was in the Nazi concentration camp. So if there's anybody that knows anything about bad stimulus, it was him. His entire family was murdered in those concentration camps. And here's what he said: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And it's in that space that our freedom lies, and power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is ownership. When we separate something that happens to us, the stimulus, from our response, we become more conscious of what can I do about it? We have choices. What choice do I have? How am I going to respond? We take responsibility. We have more passion and enthusiasm. We get more creative at solving the problems in our life. I want you to think of where you can take greater ownership. Now, here is the ownership factor model. When something happens that we can't control, your boss or you or the economy or something happens out of your control, that's the 10%. The rest, the 90%, is what we control. That's our thoughts, our self-talk. What are we telling ourselves? That leads to our attitudes, our feelings and emotions. Those attitudes, feelings, and emotions lead to our actions and behaviors, which lead to our outcomes and results. You and I get to own our outcomes. It's such a powerful principle. Today, there's so many people that are wanting to deflect that blame. They're wanting to deflect, and so we create what we're focused on. We create that chain reaction to create the results. I love this other Viktor Frankl statement. The last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose one's circumstance, one's basically attitude in any given circumstance. It's just so, I get so excited I can't even say it. All right, so I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say you're in a club dancing and an FBI agent walks in, and you're dancing, having a good time, and the FBI agent gets a little carried away, has a few drinks, does a backflip. He gets so excited, and his firearm falls out and shoots you in the leg. My question to you is, are you lucky or unlucky? 70% of people say they're unlucky because you got shot and your life is terrible. 30% will say, I'm lucky. I didn't get shot in the head. I didn't have, it could be worse, or somebody else could have gotten shot. This actually happened, by the way. This is a true story. And the person who got shot got drinks for life from the bar. So that's a pretty good outcome. But I want you to think about how you thought about that condition. Okay, number 4. Own your failures. This is really about when I have had so many failures. When I was telling you about my friend that I was giving feedback when he was losing his house, you might have thought that was harsh. I've lost a home. I know what it's like. Because of my personal choices, I started a business that I shouldn't have. I didn't listen to the advice of my wife and others, and I did it anyway. And the result was we had financial failure. We lost our home. Well, I haven't always made the greatest choices, but I owned my choices, and that allowed me to be able to change directions and have the success that I wanted to have. I've had many, many failures, but they can teach us something. Some of the most successful people have been failures. I mean, if you look at Walt Disney was fired from the paper because he wasn't creative enough. Michael Jordan, an American basketball player, was cut from his high school basketball team. You know, the Beatles were told by people that the rock bands are on their way out. Queen's basically record executive told them that their agent said that Bohemian Rhapsody, that one of their most powerful and popular songs, would not work. Failure can be a great teacher if you're willing to learn. Now, I want you to think about owning your development. This is why you're here. I love John Wooden because he's somebody that says it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. You see, you need to have a coach. Remember how quickly you spelled the word roast and turned that into toast? We need people to keep us on track. We need people who are willing to help us move forward, to grow and learn. I love this quote by Alvin Toffler. The illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Have you ever had somebody tell you something that you already knew and you said, I know, I know, I know? Stop saying I know. Why? Because every time you say I know, people will stop telling you stuff, and that's dangerous. You want to learn and grow. When somebody tells you something that you already know, say thank you. Be teachable. Because what will happen is they will continue to share information that can be an impact, a positive impact in your life. The last step, choose and own your thoughts. Own your thoughts wisely. I love this quote here by David O. McKay. Your thoughts are the architects of your destiny. Be careful about what you watch, what you listen to, who you talk to. All of the negativity that's going on right now in the news, the doomsday of what's happening in the world can have a terrible impact on how you think and therefore how you act. I want you to choose your thoughts wisely. This is what's called the self-fulfilling prophecy, or the Pygmalion effect. I want to explain that to you a little bit. Within 10 years of Einstein discovering the theory of relativity, within that decade, Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg identified what has now been called the Heisenberg principle. And what is that? They were observing subatomic particles. And what they found has now become known as the expectancy theory, or the Heisenberg principle. The mere fact of observing those atomic particles influenced how the atoms, they showed up where they expected them to. Now, I don't know how the physics or anything behind how that works, but it is a principle that our thoughts, the observation, just watching those atomic particles influence that. So what is matter? Matter is made up of atoms. Atoms are made up of energy. What is the universe made of? Energy and atoms. What are our thoughts? Our thoughts are energy. We create our reality. This is what has been said by people like Napoleon Hill. Thoughts are things. This is how our thoughts manifest themselves in our results, in our actions. The Heisenberg principle has been applied in psychology. If you observe people when you're testing them for whatever it is you're experimenting, you will change the outcome. You may behave differently when your boss is there. Your children may behave differently when you're there. This is the expectancy theory. Well, the Pygmalion effect, this is also applied in that our thoughts create our outcomes. And I want to share with you a couple of experiments as we close up today. There's a famous study by psychologist Robert Rosenthal. And what he did was, in the elementary school, he took the entire class with all the teachers, and he said, all right, you're going to observe this class that are completely average, except for John, James, Janet, and Jessica. They are exceptional students. They have high intelligence. However, you're not to treat them any differently than any of the other students. You're not to talk to them differently. You're not to give them more or less. You're going to treat everybody the same. At the end of the year, they were observed. The teachers were observed so that they made sure that didn't happen. They tested for IQ just like they did before. And most of the students were average IQ except for James, Janet, Jessica, and John, who had off the charts in IQ scores. Well, what Robert Rosenthal didn't tell the teachers was that John, Janet, Jessica, and James were just as average as everybody else. How is that possible? They didn't treat them differently. They didn't talk to them differently. What did they do? They thought about them differently. And those thoughts manifested themselves in the students, just like our thoughts manifest every day in our results. You get to choose. Do you have a job, a career, or a calling? I want to share one more study that was done by Ali Crum, who was a Yale researcher, and Ellen Langer, who is a Yale psychologist or a psychologist. And together, what they did is they studied 7 different hotel house cleaning groups, the housekeeping crews within 7 different hotels. And they split these groups in half. And half of them, they said, the work you do at cleaning house is equivalent to doing aerobic exercise. Now, the other half, they didn't give any such good news. They just said the first half, it's just like you're getting exercise, you're getting benefits of exercising. What they found after 7 weeks, that the first group had lower cholesterol, they felt healthier, they felt happier. And the second group saw no such benefits. You get to decide what it is you're watching, what it is you're listening to. Take ownership for your outcomes and results. There is a connection between our thoughts, our actions, and our results. That's what this ownership factor is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to just finish by giving you these 5 points again. Own your values. Get clear of what your values are. Act in alignment with those in your career, in your profession. Take ownership for your results. No matter what, if there are failures, own your outcomes. You'll have greater opportunity come your way. You'll be more fulfilled. Own your failures. Learn from your mistakes. Don't let them own you. Own your development. Work with someone that can help coach you and teach you and help you to make these shifts. Be very careful about what you watch, what you listen to, who you talk to. Well, I have learned a lot from my ancestors, and some of you may be thinking that, I have some type of privilege and that's why I think this way. Listen, I was raised by a single mom. My parents were divorced when I was 8. My mother died when I was 20. My dad, he was an immigrant, and he had a successful business that a friend of ours who was a CPA embezzled and lost. My father had a stroke, lost everything he had, lost all my inheritance. I had to pay for all my own education. I had no money in the bank. I had no scholarships. Growing up, I had all kinds of challenges. I experienced with discrimination, religious and race. My nieces and nephews who were mixed race were discriminated against. I have had my father had a stroke and lived with us for 5 years. You can say that, I have all this privilege, and you're right, I do have privilege. I have privilege to have all these great challenges that have taught me that despite any challenges that you have or that I have, we can choose our outcomes. Now, I don't want to minimize in any way or compare myself to your challenges. You may be experiencing some horrific things, but I know this. When you choose to own your career and make it make it more than that, make it a calling, your satisfaction will go up so much more. When you choose to own the quality of your relationships, your happiness increases. It's difficult. When you leave here today, you're going to go back into your environment and all the distractions and challenges are going to be there. So my invitation to you is choose one thing you're going to do to take greater ownership, and one thing you're going to stop doing or blaming that you're doing, and figure out where that is and stop doing that. And then I also want you to celebrate one thing that you're doing great already and recognize the wonderful things that you're doing. Own your outcomes. Be ready. Get out there and have the success that you want. And thank you so much for letting me talk with you today. It's been absolutely a privilege. And please contact me if there's anything I can do to help you take greater ownership. You can find me at Altium Leadership, ALTIUM leadership.com. Thank you.